Let me tell you about what happened 2 years ago when my life started falling apart. Back then, my daughter was just 3 years old. Because I had a busy work schedule, I didn't get to spend much time with her. So every moment I did get with her was really special. She was at that age when kids start saying meaningful words, and I treasured those moments. My wife was a stay-at-home mom, so she took care of most of the parenting responsibilities. Meanwhile, I was working 6 days a week because I had recently been promoted to a job that I wasn't fully qualified for, but paid well. On top of that, we were expecting another baby. Since my daughter started talking, it's been a lot of fun to be around her. She started speaking a bit later than other kids her age, but now she won't stop talking, and I absolutely love it. Hearing her talk reminded me why I work so hard every day to provide for my family. One Sunday evening, I was doing my favorite thing of the week, hanging out with my daughter and watching a movie together, along with our 6-year-old pit bull. I really enjoy it when she comments on what she sees on TV. If there's a cat, she mentions my grandma's cat's name. If there's a dog, she shouts out the name of our pit bull. And when she sees someone who looks like me on the screen, she points and says, "Dada," which is her way of saying daddy. If she sees someone who resembles my brother, she says uncool, meaning uncle, and so on. She keeps doing this until she gets tired or falls asleep. Nowadays, most PG-13 movies have some romantic scenes, and I don't watch R-rated movies with my 3-year-old. But it's hard to find a movie without romance these days. We were watching Wonder Woman 1984, which isn't really a romantic movie. It's family-friendly and something I can enjoy with my daughter. Plus, it has a female superhero as the main character, and I hope that empowers her as a woman and boosts her self-esteem as she grows up. Then came the part in the movie where Gal Gadot, the actress playing Wonder Woman, had a romantic scene with Chris Pine. That's when things got interesting. During that scene, my daughter said, "That's Mama and Udo." She called her mother Mama and me Dada. But who is this Udo? At first, I thought she must have misspoken. We have family members who visit often, but I've never heard her call anyone Udo before. I had no idea who Udo could be. I pondered her words for a few minutes, and then I decided to rewind the romantic scene to see if she would say Udo again. And sure enough, she said Udo once more. I turned to her and looked into her innocent, beautiful eyes. Softly, I asked her, "Who is Udo?" She pointed to the ceiling, which didn't make any sense to me. I thought maybe she was pointing to God or something. To test it further, I played a different movie with a romantic scene to see if she would react the same way. And to my surprise, my daughter said the exact same thing. It made me wonder if she was trying to tell me something, but I had no idea what it could be. Who is Udo became the biggest mystery for me at that time. Some people may argue that you can't trust what children remember or say, and I would usually agree with that. However, around that time, I read a news story about a 3-year-old who remembered their past life and even identified their murderer. Children can sometimes have a special wisdom, especially at that age. I know that story was about reincarnation, and my situation was different because it happened in the present. Still, it had a deep impact on me, and the uncanny similarities in age and the recent encounter with that story made me believe that children were oracles. It was such a surreal situation, and the biggest mystery for me was figuring out who is Udo. I couldn't possibly ask my wife about Udo because she might lie to me. Back then, I had complete trust in my wife and expected nothing but honesty from her. Speaking of my wife, she was born in the Middle East and came to America with her family as a teenager. She was raised as a Muslim. My parents also migrated from the same country as hers, but I was born here in the U.S. We were introduced through family connections, so our marriage had strong family support. We both identify as Muslims, but we're not extremely religious. We observe Islamic traditions and festivities and attend mosque on Fridays. Sometimes my wife wears a hijab, but it's her choice, and I don't ask her to do it. Honestly, I don't really mind either way. She's 26 years old and I'm 32. She's studying psychology in college, and before we started a family, she worked as a high school teacher. We decided together that she should become a stay-at-home mom and take care of the children. As for me, I work as a financial manager, and I'm relatively young for such a position at a big bank. We moved into our current apartment about 7 months ago because I received a promotion and had to relocate. It came with a significant pay increase of over 40K. Now that we know the background, let's continue. I remember putting my baby to sleep that night and still pondering over who Udo could be. I never thought about confronting my wife because, honestly, accusing her of something so serious without any evidence would be foolish. Besides, my wife was an amazing partner in every way. She was obedient, took care of household chores, cooked delicious meals, and we had a healthy bed life. There were no red flags whatsoever. So why would I accuse her of having an affair just because my daughter saw a movie scene and mentioned Mama and Udo? It seemed like a far-fetched idea. I don't know who Udo is, and it could very well be just a figment of my daughter's imagination. Accusing someone without solid proof is a serious matter, and once spoken, it can't be taken back. My next step is to find out who Udo really is. Even though the thought of my wife having an affair with Udo tormented me, I completely forgot about it the next day and carried on with my usual routine. Fast forward 2 months. It had been 9 months since we moved to our new apartment. One day, we were walking our dog at a community park near our place. It was me, my daughter, my wife, and our dog. Suddenly, we crossed paths with a man who was also walking his dog, coming from the opposite direction. The interesting thing was that my dog seemed to recognize his dog right away. Both dogs acted like they knew each other, and my dog started running toward the stranger and his dog. I quickly pulled on the leash to stop my dog. I glanced at my wife, and she was trying her best to ignore what was happening, avoiding eye contact and looking straight ahead. When my daughter saw the man, she called out, "Udo! Udo!" She called him with the same familiarity she would use for any of my relatives that she knows. But the man reacted differently. It was as if he didn't know her at all. He ignored us and continued walking, dragging his dog away, acting like a complete stranger who didn't recognize any of us. I made eye contact with the man, politely smiled at him, and he smiled back before continuing on his way. It was such a strange experience that left me needing an explanation. There was an awkward energy surrounding us. Even though the encounter with this stranger lasted only a few seconds, it felt much longer. I looked at my wife again, and she was still looking straight ahead, as if she hadn't noticed what had just happened. I asked her who the man was and if we knew him. She responded dismissively, saying he was just an upstairs neighbor, as if she barely knew him. I responded by questioning how our daughter knew his name if he was just an upstairs neighbor. My wife explained that the man had a habit of letting his dog off the leash, and his dog would come looking for our dog. They had interacted several times, and he would greet our daughter. It seemed like a reasonable explanation, right? But there was one thing that bothered me. Remember, 2 months ago when my daughter saw a romantic scene in a movie and called out Mama and Udo? That same Udo is the person my daughter just called out to, who turned out to be our neighbor. Coincidence? I don't think so. And when I asked my daughter who Udo was back then, she pointed to the ceiling. Strange, isn't it? Now my wife has confirmed that Udo is indeed an upstairs neighbor. This can't be just a coincidence. Something is going on here, and I was determined to find out what it is. My wife was acting oddly and being secretive. I never thought she would lie to me, and I hadn't caught her in a lie before, but there was a suspicious feeling in the air. We walked in silence for the rest of our walk after the encounter with Udo. I started thinking about all the what-ifs, and how my life would be turned upside down if my wife was really having an affair. The idea of my wife being close with another man disgusted me. Even though the evidence was only circumstantial, I felt repulsed by the thought. Before we reached our apartment, my wife noticed my awkwardness and asked me what was going on. I simply replied with nothing and remained silent, lost in my thoughts. When we got home, I abruptly asked my wife the name of the man we encountered. She seemed upset and claimed she didn't know. The sudden question surprised her, and I could tell she sensed that I suspected something, but it wasn't the right time to confront her. I was determined to gather evidence. That's all I could think about the next day. Where there's smoke, there's fire, right? I went online in search of answers. I found forums where I could share my story and document it so I wouldn't keep it all bottled up inside. Plus, I hoped to find support, and maybe someone who had gone through a similar situation and knew how to find out if my wife was having an affair with Udo. Perhaps someone would tell me I was just being paranoid and risking my marriage for no reason. The first thing I needed to find out was the real name of the guy. If his name wasn't actually Udo, maybe Udo was just his dog's name. In that case, my suspicion would fall apart because it's impossible for Mama to be romantically involved with a dog. I also realized that I shouldn't take my daughter's words too seriously. She's only a 3-year-old, and her imagination can run wild. People on the forum suggested hiring a private investigator to uncover the upstairs neighbor's identity. I couldn't go snooping through his mail or follow him myself due to my busy schedule. Taking time off work to track his movements and find out his profession seemed tempting, but hiring a private investigator would be more convenient, less expensive, and emotionally draining. I found a private investigator online who specialized in infidelity cases. I provided him with the gate code to my apartment and explained my schedule. His first task was to discover the neighbor's name, where he worked, his schedule, and his relationship with my wife. The first week of investigation was stressful. I had to act normal around my wife and go about my daily routine as if nothing was happening. I wanted her to let her guard down and not suspect anything. I made sure to stay at work longer than usual. It was important for me not to harbor any hate towards my wife at this stage. I was still in the process of finding out the truth, and everything was based on speculation and circumstantial evidence. After a week, I met up with the private investigator at a prearranged spot to hear his report. He informed me about the man's findings. He discovered that the man's first name is Hugo, but for obvious reasons, I can't disclose his full last name. Hugo is 36 years old. The investigator shared that Hugo is recently divorced and has 2 kids. He shares custody with his ex-wife, who got the house in their divorce settlement. That's why he's living in our apartment. Hugo has a girlfriend and is into fitness. The investigator revealed that Hugo works as a logistics manager at a distribution company. He has several employees under him, most of whom are female. The investigator presented me with a folder containing pictures of my wife and daughter at the dog park, sitting on the same bench as Hugo while their dogs played around. According to the investigator, their interaction appeared friendly, but he didn't witness any physical contact or signs of affection. So far, things were not looking good for my wife. It was troubling to see my wife lying about not knowing him or his name when there were multiple photos of them chatting together. Now, I had strong reason to believe that my daughter was right all along. Hugo sounded a lot like Udo. The most disturbing part was the possibility that my daughter may have witnessed something inappropriate between them. It still bothers me to this day. We have never engaged in such acts in front of our daughter, not even when she was just a few months old. We've always kept our displays of affection private. Even though I would describe our bed life as healthy, we aren't the affectionate type outside of the bedroom. The private investigator asked if I wanted him to continue, and I decided to retain his services for 2 more weeks to see if he could uncover any further information. To be honest, I wasn't entirely sure what else I wanted him to find out. There was no way he would catch my wife and Hugo publicly displaying affection unless it was happening in my apartment or his. But I was encouraged by the initial debriefing and wanted to dig deeper. During the debriefing the following week, the private investigator observed that Hugo seemed to be involved with multiple women. He witnessed him going out with 3 different women, 2 of whom were his employees working under him, which is a violation in most companies. However, the investigator didn't discover anything new about my wife, apart from the fact that she hangs out with Hugo at the park along with our daughter. In the 3rd week, I asked the investigator to look into those women Hugo was having affairs with and find out if they were married. He found that one of them was married with children, while the marital status of the other woman was single. He couldn't gather any information about the 3rd woman. At this point, I started thinking that Hugo is a terrible person. He's sleeping with other people's wives and abusing his authority at work. Moreover, it's highly likely that he's also ducked my wife. I needed more evidence to confirm if Hugo is having a relationship with my wife. I already had proof of my wife lying, but I wanted to know if she was putting my health at risk and potentially jeopardizing the paternity of our child. The investigator provided me with a hidden camera to install in our house, including our bedroom, along with instructions on how to monitor it remotely. In the 1st week, I didn't see anything suspicious, no signs of Hugo coming to my apartment. The 2nd week yielded the same result. I started considering giving up on the surveillance before my wife discovers the camera. She cleans the entire house every day, making it difficult to maintain its hidden position. I could confront her based on the evidence I already had and file for a divorce, citing her emotional affair as the reason. However, the evidence of infidelity is weak since I only have proof of her lying to me. I could mention what our daughter said, but my wife would deny it, and I don't want to put any strain on their relationship. It's possible they are engaging in their activities at Hugo's apartment, where I wouldn't be able to capture any evidence. There's no way the private investigator could just camp out on the stairs of our apartment building, watching my front door all day. I was ready to throw in the towel, but I couldn't give up now. I decided to give it one more week, and boy did it pay off. It was a roller coaster of emotions as I watched the evidence unfold. I felt a wave of sadness and humiliation, but also a sense of relief that this agonizing 4-month ordeal was finally coming to an end. It had been a whole 11 months since we moved into this apartment. My daughter turned out to be right all along. She had told me about it 4 months ago, and now I finally caught my wife in the act. Let me share what I witnessed on camera after I left for work. My wife took our daughter out for a walk with the dog, and when they returned, they were accompanied by Hugo. Hay entered my apartment together with the dogs. Hugo followed behind my wife, and my daughter was in front of her. Then, I saw Hugo come up from behind and embrace my wife, caressing her and kissing her neck. Then she turned around, and they began passionately kissing each other. The only thing keeping them apart was her 6-month pregnancy, which could potentially be mine or Hugo's. This conclusive evidence gave me the confidence to confront her. Their encounter didn't escalate beyond kissing and touching. Eventually, they separated, and he left. It deeply hurt me to see how she repaid my love and commitment. I treated her with respect, never laid a hand on her in anger, and provided for all her needs. Yet she couldn't remain faithful or give me the loyalty I deserved. Her actions endangered my life by engaging in an affair with a man who had multiple partners, putting me at risk of life-threatening STDs. She betrayed the sole provider for our family. She behaved like a dog and should face the consequences of her actions. It was time to have a serious conversation with her. When I arrived home, I confronted my wife about her relationship with Hugo. She initially denied knowing what I was talking about and acted oblivious. However, the fear in her eyes revealed the truth she was hiding deep inside. Her secret was no longer concealed. I presented her with the pictures of her and Hugo together in the park. It was at that moment she finally admitted to knowing him, but she didn't want me to find out because she feared I would suspect something was going on between them. She kept lying, insisting that they were just talking and nothing inappropriate had occurred. That's when I revealed the existence of the hidden camera, leading to her cries of shock and embarrassment. Initially, I didn't feel angry or overly emotional because I had shed countless tears over the past 2 months. She fell to the floor, prostrating herself and begging at my feet. I asked her how long the affair had been going on, and she confessed that it started 2 months after we moved into the apartment. It had been almost a year since we relocated. Curiosity compelled me to inquire about how it all began. According to her, they met at the park and started chatting. He claimed to be a fitness trainer and had a small gym set up in his apartment. Since she was feeling bored at home, she went upstairs when he invited her, and that's how it all started. These are her words, not mine. It's been over a year since the confrontation, so I'm comparatively calmer now. However, the emotions are still raw, and I continue to feel the pain of my reputation being tarnished by this woman. Even to this day, it feels as though people are looking at me with disdain. There were tears from both of us, and she tried to beg me not to divorce her, saying it would bring disgrace to her and her family. In her presence, I called her parents and shared everything she had done. I was certain that her dad would deal with her before I did if he got hold of her, because she had disrespected his family too. That's what I admire about the old school guys back home. I told my wife that she couldn't continue living with me in my apartment. I couldn't kick her out right away, especially since her name was on the lease. Plus, she was pregnant, though the paternity of the baby was uncertain. I informed her that she would be sleeping in a different room until I found her another apartment to rent. I agreed to cover the rent for 3 months while she searched for a job, and after that, she would be on her own. Some people might expect me to kick her out immediately, but it's not that simple. I need her to take care of our daughter until I find a babysitter. I can't afford to miss work or lose focus because I have a lot of responsibilities. At that time, I didn't know who the pregnancy belonged to, so it was a complicated situation. 2 days later, I helped her find a new apartment and had her sign the divorce agreement. We didn't want to spend too much on lawyers, so we opted for mediation. We were married for 5 years, and she stayed at home for 4 of those years. She earned significantly less than me when she was working. According to the divorce agreement, I was supposed to pay her alimony for 1.5 years. She couldn't go back to her parents or other family members because she was ashamed of what she had done. Pretty much everyone who knew her also knew the reason for our divorce. As for Hugo, we later discovered that the other woman he was involved with also had a boyfriend. So, we shared evidence of their affair with her boyfriend, the co-worker's husband who had kids, and the boyfriend of the other woman who didn't work with Hugo. They all received copies of the proof of their infidelity. We also contacted the HR department and sent them the pictures. We didn't need to remind them that he had violated company policy by sleeping with his subordinates. Fortunately, the company he worked for had a policy against that, and he was eventually fired. I had never really spoken to Hugo before, except for exchanging smiles during the dog walks. But once I was determined, I worked hard and spent a lot of money to ruin his life, just as he had ruined mine. He ended up unemployed and had to move out of that apartment. I'm not sure if he knew I was the one behind it all. I'm sure my ex-wife must have told him something. About 6 months after my daughter informed me about her mother and Hugo, my ex-wife gave birth. Even though we weren't living together, I went to the hospital to check if the baby was mine. Hugo is Hispanic, and people from my country have a similar complexion, so the baby could easily pass as mine. We decided to do a paternity test, but the results wouldn't be available until the next day. No one was there for the delivery, except me. It was different from when our daughter was born, and the whole village was at the hospital. Everyone has pretty much turned their back on her. Her last months of pregnancy were filled with regret and despair.